It's easy to think of our bodies as, well, just one thing, right? A single unit. But the reality, oh, it's so much more dramatic. Inside you, right now, there's this epic, high-stakes saga playing out. We're talking about trillions of individual cells, each one in its own fight for survival. And in this explainer, we're going to dive right into that story. So picture this. Every single one of your cells, at this very moment, is facing a choice. It's like it's standing at a crossroads. When stress hits, it's got three basic options on the table. It can adapt to the new challenge, it can take a hit, get injured, and try to bounce back, or it can perish. And this choice, this simple three-way decision, is what dictates pretty much everything. Our health, our diseases, and yeah, even how we age. Okay, so where does a story like this even begin? Well, you might think it starts with a big dramatic battle, but actually, it doesn't. It starts in a place of total peace, a world of perfect balance. And that state has a name, homeostasis. Really, you can just think of it as the cell's happy place. It's the ultimate goal, right? A totally stable existence where everything is just working. It's the ordinary world for our tiny cellular hero before, things get complicated. But of course, that peace was never going to last forever, was it? Sooner or later, something has to come along and shake things up. A stressor arrives. Maybe it's a bigger workload, maybe it's a new threat from the outside. Whatever it is, the cell is suddenly forced to change. It has to adapt. So how exactly does a cell rise to a challenge like that? Well, if the demand goes up, they've got a couple of tricks up their sleeve. First, they can bulk up. This is called hypertrophy, and it's literally when the individual cells just get bigger. The classic example? A weightlifter's muscles. Or if the tissue can do it, the cells can just multiply. They can make more of themselves. That's called hyperplasia, and you see that, for example, in how the uterus expands during pregnancy. But here's the thing. Adaptation isn't always about getting bigger or making more. Sometimes, the smartest move is a strategic retreat. Let's say nutrients or stimulation drop off. Well, the cells can just shrink to save energy. That's called atrophy, and it's something we see in an aging brain. But then there's an even more dramatic move. They can completely reinvent themselves. It's called metaplasia, where one type of cell literally transforms into another type, one that's tougher and better suited to a new, harsh environment. Think about the lining of your esophagus changing to deal with chronic acid reflux. It's an absolutely brilliant survival tactic. But yeah, it definitely comes with its own risks. Okay, so what happens when the stress is just too much? Or when the cell's best attempts to adapt just aren't enough? Well, that's when our story takes a much darker turn. The fight is no longer with the outside world. The conflict moves inside the cell, and the cell itself becomes this chaotic, biochemical battlefield. Whatever the attack is, maybe it's a lack of oxygen, maybe a chemical toxin, it wages all-out war on the cell's most vital systems. It goes right for the jugular. It targets the mitochondria, the cell's power plants. It hits the energy supply, the cell's protective walls, and even the proteins that do all the work. Nothing is safe. This whole attack happens on 5 fronts, and they're all connected. It's like a catastrophic domino effect. First, you get an energy crisis, ATP depletion, and that just cripples the mitochondria. Next thing you know, destructive calcium comes flooding in. The outer membranes get breached, and then finally, the cell's essential protein machinery just breaks down. Now, 2 of the biggest weapons in this internal war are calcium and free radicals. That surge of calcium, it's literally like a Trojan horse. It seems harmless at first, but once it gets inside, it unleashes hell by activating all these destructive enzymes that just start tearing the cell apart from the inside out. And at the same time, you've got free radicals waging their own chemical warfare, just wrecking lipids, proteins, and even our DNA. At first, some of this damage might actually be reversible. The cell could swell up a bit, but hey, if you take the stress away, it might bounce back. But if that injury keeps going, the cell eventually crosses a critical line. It's the point of no return. Once the membranes are seriously damaged and the mitochondria fail completely, that's it. There's no coming back from that. The cell is doomed. And this brings us to the climax of the whole saga. Because even when a cell is fated to die, it still has one last critical decision to make. And that is, how is it going to go out? And there are 2 very, very different ways this can happen. Okay, path number 1 is necrosis. And this is the violent, messy, chaotic way to go. You can really think of it as cellular homicide. The cell just swells up until it bursts, spilling all its toxic guts out into the surrounding tissue. It's a complete mess. And this explosion, as you can imagine, triggers a huge inflammatory response, which ends up causing all this collateral damage to its perfectly innocent neighbors. Then there's the other option, apoptosis. And this is the complete opposite. It's a quiet, orderly, almost dignified exit. It's a programmed cellular suicide. Instead of exploding, the cell shrinks. It carefully condenses its DNA, and then it neatly packages itself up into these little membrane-bound bodies. And then immune cells just come along and sweep them away. The crucial part is there's no leak, no mess, and zero inflammation. It's a perfectly clean getaway. So the difference between these two could not be more clear, right? Necrosis is like that messy homicide. The cell swells, it leaks, and it always triggers inflammation. Apoptosis, on the other hand, is that planned suicide. The cell shrinks, everything is contained, and there's no inflammation. One is just a pathological disaster, while the other is often a totally normal and necessary process for getting rid of old or unwanted cells. But the story doesn't just end with death. I mean, what about the aftermath? Sometimes, after the battle is over, whether the cell managed to survive or not, scars get left behind. One of the most common kinds of scars is basically junk piling up. It's an accumulation of stuff that the cell just can't process or get rid of. A classic example of this is something called steatosis, or fatty change, which you see a lot in the liver. When liver cells get injured by something like, say, alcohol, they just start collecting these big blobs of fat, which, as you can guess, really messes with their ability to do their job. And there are other kinds of marks that can be left behind too. There's something called lipofuscin, which is basically a wear and tear pigment that builds up from a lifetime of damage. Then there's hemosiderin. That's the iron-based pigment that you actually see in bruises as they heal. And finally, you can get pathologic calcification, which leaves behind these little calcium deposits, almost like hardened scars from battles long ago. And all of this, all these little scars and bits of damage, brings us to the final act of this whole saga, aging. I mean, what is aging, really? When you get down to it at the cellular level, it's just this slow, steady accumulation of all these small injuries over a lifetime. You've probably heard of things like telomere shortening. That's like the tips of our chromosomes getting a little shorter every time a cell divides. It all means that most of our cells, well, they have an expiration date. Aging is just the long fade out after a lifetime of fighting these battles. So when you look at the whole picture, the entire life of a cell is just one big cycle. It starts out trying to achieve that perfect balance, that homeostasis. Then it gets challenged by stress, it does its best to adapt, it might suffer an injury, and eventually, it faces death. And this simple story, this cycle, is honestly the key to understanding the foundation of pretty much every single human disease. Think about it. Every breath you take, every bite of food you eat, every workout you crush, it's all feeding into this incredible microscopic drama that's playing out trillions of times over inside you right now. It is a constant, non-stop negotiation between your cells and their world. So that leaves one big question, doesn't it? What cellular saga is unfolding inside you?